By the 19th century, the Russian Empire had religion at its heart. More Russian Orthodox pilgrims visited Jerusalem than any other branch of the Christian Church. Since the fall of Constantinople, Russia saw itself as the natural heir to Byzantium and protector of all Orthodox Christians. Russian nationalists dreamed of conquering Istanbul and transforming it into Zagreb, a Russian capital for an Orthodox Christian empire stretching from Siberia to Jerusalem. Until that dream could be realized, Moscow would be the capital of the Orthodoxy, and its New Jerusalem monastery, here just outside the city, a symbol of its intense faith and ambitions. The monastery of the New Jerusalem was an extraordinary project, an attempt to replicate the Holy Land in the heart of Mother Russia. And this was the very centerpiece of the church, the tomb of Christ, no less. And it's an incredible idea, really, as if by replicating the sacred architecture of the Holy Land could provide Russian Christians with a place of pilgrimage, until such a time that Orthodox Christianity could reclaim Jerusalem for its own. It's a strange and rather dislocating experience. The monastery was founded in 1656 by the Russian Patriarch Nikon, who wanted its central church to be a faithful replica of the holiest Christian site in Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Vasily Martisovich is a spokesman for the monastery.
В 17 веке это было крайне тяжело. И патриарх Никон в 17 веке, он понимал, что построив копию вот этого храма гроба Господня, он воплотит те мечты русского человека, который мечтал попасть в это святое место, чтобы, поклонившись этим святыням, которые там есть, он мог как бы перенестись духом, увидеть, что все то же самое есть в Иерусалиме.
Where we're standing right now, actually inside the church, what are the specific features that we see around us? How do they relate to Jerusalem?
Идентичны тем святыням, которые есть в храме гроба Господня. Например, вот кувуклия, гроб Господень, камень помазания или камень повития имеет такие же размеры.
What does that tell us about the idea of Jerusalem and Christianity in relation to Russia as a country?
Первый пал еще в V веке. Византийская империя берет на себя идею Второго Рима. И в XV веке Византийская империя под ударами турок падает. И вот наступает то время, когда начинается искание Третьего Рима. Москва могла говорить о том, что она на себя может взять эту идею, то, что Москва — Третий Рим. К этому толкали многие публицисты того времени. Многие писали, что два Рима пали, третий Москва стоит, а четвертому не бывать. То есть с этой идеей многие связывали постройку Нового Иерусалима.
Russia's religious fervor gained added momentum when in 1825 Tsar Nicholas I became emperor of all the Russias. He was a devout Christian and champion of the Orthodox Church, whose advancement he placed at the center of his foreign policy.
Nicholas I was a man of order. He was a military man. He saw the Napoleonic Wars. To a certain extent, he was hostile to European powers because he saw the West as a source of infection for his Russian Empire. His own religious ideas were strongly messianic. There was a strong sense that Russia had to promote an idea of Russianness which was inseparable from the protection and promotion of orthodoxy right across the world. This went way back in Russian history to the idea of Moscow as the Third Rome.
Tsar Nicholas visited New Jerusalem in 1818, and this was the same year that his son was born, and he saw this conjunction as a kind of divine providence. Now, Nicholas was a very religious man, there's no doubt about that, but he also suffered from mental illness, an affliction of the Romanov family. And sometimes it's hard to unravel the religious enthusiasm from imperial ambitions, from the delusions of a madman. This is what he had to say to King William of Prussia. "I wage war not for worldly advantage or conquest, but solely for a Christian purpose. Am I to be left alone to fight under a holy banner and see others who call themselves Christians unite around the crescent and to attack Christendom? There is nothing left for me but to fight, to win, or to perish with honor, a martyr to our holy faith. And when I say this, I declare it on behalf of all Russia." Tsar Nicholas's Christian zeal may have been genuine, but the Western powers weren't buying it. By the 19th century, a third of all Russian exports were passing through Black Sea ports. They feared Russian expansion was less about religion and more about empire. Eager to thwart Russian ambitions, Europe threw its weight behind Ottoman reforms, hoping to shore up the empire and its ties with Western Europe while protecting its Christian populations. The result was a series of reforms known as the Tanzimat.
What the Tanzimat reforms did, slowly over a long period, beginning in 1839, was to give more religious rights, more autonomy to the Christian minorities, to make government in those areas a little more autonomous and accountable, and to reform administration along more Western lines.
This then bleeds out into having an impact on how people live their lives on the streets. So we start to get reforms in clothing, that suddenly women and men are encouraged to wear Western-style clothes. So the fez replaces the turban, and a frock coat and a shirt with a collar replaces what was the kind of typical Ottoman gear, and even Western shoes are worn on the streets.
Tsar Nicholas, ensconced in his luxuriously appointed winter palace in St. Petersburg, seemed oblivious to European attitudes regarding the Turks. Assuming Western powers would always support a fellow Christian nation over a Muslim one, he decided to discuss the Ottoman problem with the British ambassador. This throne room was where the Tsars gave audience to foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, emissaries, that kind of thing. And it was in one such exchange between Tsar Nicholas I and the British ambassador that he famously declared, "We have a sick man on our hands, a man gravely ill. It would be a great misfortune if he were to slip through our hands, especially before the necessary arrangements have been made." Well, there was no mistaking who the sick man was. That was the Ottoman Empire. And that rather chilling phrase, "before the necessary arrangements have been made."
Nicholas believed that the Ottoman Empire was going to collapse, and that it was therefore wise, even legitimate, for the Western powers to take measures so that the Ottoman territories were split between themselves in a way that would give Russia, if not direct control of the Balkans, then at least a dominant influence over those areas of the Balkans where the Orthodox were in a majority.
As the sick man of Europe becomes sicker, everybody gathers around it with a keener intent to work out what their best interests are.
Russia was poised to deliver the fatal blow, but the catalyst for action would not take place in Istanbul or the Balkans, but in the Ottoman-controlled holy city of Jerusalem. Built on what is believed to be the location of Jesus Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the city's most important Christian site and has long been a contested property between various branches of the Christian faith. The ceremony of the Holy Fire, held every Easter, is one of the church's most spectacular events, but it has also been a flashpoint for conflict. In 1846, disputes between French Catholics and Orthodox Russians over privileges to the site became so embittered that an all-out riot erupted during the Easter celebrations. Pilgrims joined priests on both sides in a spree of violence. When the fighting was eventually quelled, more than 40 people lay dead on the floor.
France had the idea that it was the main protectorate of the Christian community in the Holy Lands. An idea of France's mission going back to the Crusades of the Middle Ages. And they had secured from the Ottoman government, which ruled in Jerusalem, what they thought was a privileged access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. But that was, for the Russians, negated by their own treaties with the Ottomans, which they thought gave the Orthodox privileged access to these very same places. You can imagine the position of the Ottomans. They prevaricated, saying yes to everybody in order to let the problem they hoped go away, but it didn't go away.
To force the issue, Russian troops once again occupied the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia and amassed forces on the Ottoman frontier in the Caucasus. For Tsar Nicholas, the situation was becoming intolerable. Determined to fulfill Russia's Christian duty, he issued an ultimatum. The Russians demanded a restoration of Orthodox privileges in Jerusalem and also that Russia be recognized as the protector of Orthodox Christians, not just in the Holy Lands, but throughout the Ottoman Empire. Well, obviously, this was going to greatly compromise Ottoman sovereignty. The Russian invasion of the Danube provinces had already compromised Ottoman territorial integrity. And so, Sultan Abdülmecid felt compelled to declare war. Russia was a major power, but its army was obsolescent, unprofessional, and ill-equipped. Russia's navy, however, was another story. Since its founding by Peter the Great in the 17th century, it had developed into a formidable force. By the 19th century, it was turning the Black Sea into a Russian lake and threatening Western shipping by making repeated incursions into the Mediterranean. In the north, the island fortress of Kronstadt, here just outside of St. Petersburg, dominated the Gulf of Finland, protecting the city from invasion. Kronstadt continues to be an important naval base.
Robert! Oh, how are you doing? How are you doing?
Yeah, beautiful day, what?
Yeah, it's good. Welcome.
Local historian Roman Shaposhnik is going to show me one of the Russian Navy's most impressive 19th century creations. Roman, this is a fantastic landscape you brought me to. Sea, sky, and everywhere I look, fortifications. Tell me something about the history.
This battery was built in times of Nicholas I. All these fortifications, they're artificial islands. Imagine how difficult it was to create. And this fort was armed by 137 guns.
Wow.
In 1854, the English and French naval forces came to the Gulf of Finland, and Admiral Napier, the commander, said in the Telegraph newspaper that his breakfast will be in Kronstadt and his dinner will be in St. Petersburg. But when he saw it first time, I think he changed his plans a bit.
And understandably. So I imagine with all these fortifications, it's a very complex system of lines of fire and...
Sure. In this period of time, Russia had very sophisticated and very strong navy. And the Kronstadt fortress became the strongest naval fortress in Europe.
The Russian Navy may have been largely defensive in the north, but here in the Black Sea, it was on the attack, prowling the waters in search of Ottoman warships and supply convoys heading for the Caucasus. Initially, they met with little success. In November 1853, Russian fortunes changed completely when they came across the Ottoman squadron, quite by chance, sheltering from a storm in the port of Sinope on the northern coastline of Anatolia. Completely unprepared for battle, the Ottoman vessels were sitting ducks. Russian guns bombarded the ships relentlessly. As the bombs ripped into the wooden planking, they exploded, tearing the ships apart and setting them alight. It was the first time explosive shells had been used in naval warfare. The effect was devastating. The Russian assault destroyed the entire Ottoman squadron and laid waste to the port, killing thousands of sailors and civilians. It was a great victory for Russia, but for Western Europe, a troubling turn of events.
Britain and France realised they have to intervene because there is now nothing left to stop the Russians getting hold of the Bosphorus and potentially taking Constantinople. They have to enter the war at this point.
In March 1854, Britain and France declared war on Russia. The Ottoman Empire, once the embodiment of evil, had become an ally. Like so many times before, the Danube River became the front line in the early stages of the war. Stretching from the Black Sea through the Balkans and into Central Europe, the Danube was a hugely strategic prize. Whoever controlled it gained a military and economic advantage. The Ottomans had fought hard to take it back in the 15th century, and they certainly weren't going to give it up without a fight. This stretch of the Danube is where in 1853 Russian troops crossed to lay siege to the fortified Ottoman town of Silistra, just there. The idea was that once they'd taken Silistra, they would then march on Istanbul as they had done 25 years earlier. But as so often in war, the best laid plans just don't happen that way. Russian forces positioned themselves on hilltops overlooking the city and began a relentless bombardment, day and night. It was, in effect, a shock and awe offensive, designed to topple the town quickly. To the casual observer, it was simply a fantastic spectacle. The young Leo Tolstoy, who was an officer in the Russian army, here at the time, provides us with a vivid picture of the scene in a letter that he wrote to his aunt. I amused myself, watch in hand, counting the cannon shots that I heard, and I counted 100 explosions in the space of a minute. The spectacle was truly beautiful, especially at night. What at first seemed like a spectator sport to Russian onlookers soon turned into a nightmare. The Ottomans had learned from the last Russian siege of Silistra and built a ring of sturdy fortifications around the city.
The Russians found themselves held up in Silistra by Turkish forces that turned out to be much better than they'd expected. The Turks were good at fortifications, artillery. They were used to siege warfare against fortresses.
As the siege dragged on, the death toll steadily rose, numbering thousands on both sides. And the war descended into a particularly grisly hand-to-hand combat. Tsar Nicholas urged his commanders to put a speedy end to the siege. But the Ottoman resistance was ferocious. The Turks fight like devils, reported a captain in the Russian artillery. After one particularly bloody assault, there were 2,000 Russian dead lying on the field of battle. The very next day, the people of Silistra came out and cut off their heads, hoping for prize money. When this was refused, they simply bunged their grisly trophies outside the city walls, where they lay unburied for the longest time. The huge loss of Russian life, fears that Austria would join the campaign, and news that British and French troops had landed at the Black Sea port of Varna, little more than 100 kilometers away, compelled the Russian general to call an end to the siege and retreat back across the river. The Russian offensive had been a complete failure, and the war was just beginning. The Russian withdrawal from Silistra removed any immediate threat to the Ottoman Empire, and the war could have ended there and then. But the Sultan didn't want to let the Russians go that easily. And the French and the English, they'd come too far. They didn't want to go home without a fight. Moreover, they were keen to put an end to Russian influence in the Black Sea once and for all. So they re-embarked their soldiers on the troop carriers and set sail for the Crimean Peninsula with the intent of destroying the Russian naval base at Sebastopol. Unfortunately, what looked like an easy victory on paper turned out to be a disastrous military quagmire for all concerned. Waged almost entirely on the Crimean Peninsula, what became known as the Crimean War would drag on for 2 more years and enter history as one of the most disastrous military campaigns of its time. Famed for Florence Nightingale and the charge of the Light Brigade, the Crimean War was plagued by incompetence and mismanagement. Thousands of soldiers on all sides met their death in battle, but many more died of disease or froze to death over the winter months. When Russia finally surrendered, the estimated loss of life had reached some 700,000. At least 500,000 of those were Russian.
In Russia, the neglect of the troops, the poor supply, this was all blamed on Nicholas, and the defeat for a war that many in Russia believed hadn't been necessary in the first place. It was a war fought for delusional goals. And so when Nicholas I dies in February 1855, he knew that it was his responsibility. This was a catastrophe for him because it was the collapse of his ideology, his worldview, his religious belief, his sense that he was on a divine mission. This failure was a personal catastrophe. The legacies of the Crimean War were equally profound. Russia's ambitions in that area would not go away. The pan-Slav movement was strengthened by the Crimean War. The sense of Russia's mission in the Balkans also strengthened. In the ethnic religious fault line between Christian and Muslim Europe remains and indeed is exacerbated by the Crimean War.